Hello, I'm Rosie. Today I'm going to be unveiling the book that I read for my TBR Jar challenge for January and discussing that a bit more, as well as finding out my challenge for February, which I am very excited for. For the TBR Jar, I've seen a lot of people posting videos about it, so I thought I would do one for myself, but because I have two bookshelves in two separate houses with different to read piles, because I've got university to read and home to read, I thought having one pot with all the books in would just be too complicated. And then I found Catty Tastic's video, I think that's how you say the name, where rather than putting in all the book titles, she's created challenges for herself. And I thought I would do that. It seemed like a good idea and it would suit my style of reading quite well. I'll put a link to her video in the description, as well as a link to the blog post I wrote describing the challenge. So, let's get started. For January, my TBR Jar challenge was to read a classical book. For this I had quite a few options, from some Jane Austen or even Shakespeare. And I know I've had Dante's The Divine Comedy on my to-read list for quite some time. But instead I decided to go with A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is because I've never read any Dickens, and so I decided to go with one that I've heard good things about, but I didn't know too much about the story, other than it's set in both Paris and London. The main story is that there's a group of characters, a mix of both French and English, who come together through a series of incidents. The main incident being the imprisonment of Dr. Manet for quite a long time, I can't remember the exact number of years, and his subsequent recovery and him moving back to England with his daughter. The first half of the book is these characters as they get to know one another and start kind of developing, and you explore their lives and their personalities. You get to know them a bit better. And then once about you get halfway through, the French Revolution strikes. As about half these characters are French, you can imagine that it does have some effect. But the main story is about how the French Revolution affects the whole group of characters as they end up being forced back to Paris and having to deal with a series of trials. There's death, there's murder, there's scheming and betrayal. For me, I found it quite difficult to get into to start with. I'm not used to reading this style of writing. I think it took me about 3 or 4 chapters before I finally managed to get into the flow of the story and work out who was who. But I also found this first part really slow. Like, it took 180 pages roundabout before we actually got to the French Revolution. So for me this kind of was a bit odd. I can't really think of the exact word that I really need, but I would have much rather if there'd been less on the characters' lives to start with, like how they have dinner parties together and certain things. Like, there's a few snippets that are essential. You can kind of see why there's such a focus on the characters at the beginning as things go through, as like secrets are revealed and you kind of learn a bit about the characters' motives. But it was a lot more interesting and entertaining once we got to the French Revolution, and there was a lot more consequence. There was a lot more riding on the actions of the characters, rather than just sitting in the garden under a tree chatting. What I really enjoyed was the development of the characters and how they started to thrive or fall as the French Revolution hit. For example, the 2 main men in Lucy's life reacted completely differently, but these were mainly due to the circumstances that they had been born in and they had grown up in. And that's what I found particularly interesting. There's so many themes of betrayal and love, poverty, wealth, that you kind of get engrossed in it and the different aspects of the story. The secondary characters are also really thrilling. They're like well developed and you can kind of see the background of it, although some of the twists are a bit out of nowhere. You don't really get a build up to it. For example, Madame Defarge's background. That just sprung on me and kind of fell a bit flat. Whereas Charles Darnay's background, I could see a lot better. And also, while I enjoyed the way Dickens told the story. I kind of felt he missed out on certain scenes that I would have really enjoyed reading. For example, there's one at the end where Lucy is reunited with someone. And I kind of wish I'd seen that. It goes from her being completely oblivious to everything being fine. And for me, that didn't really sit that well, particularly since it involved a massive sacrifice by another character, and that wasn't really touched upon. I didn't get to see the other characters' reactions to it, their thoughts on it. Like, while I could imagine, I kind of wish I'd been able to see Dickens' twist on it, because he knew the characters a lot better than I did. So while it is a really good book, and I really enjoyed reading it, despite it taking me a while to get into, there are things that I would have liked to see in it. And I would have liked to perhaps a bit more focus on some characters more than others. Like, there's one character who is set up to be a massive figure, like he's mentioned a lot, and then suddenly nothing. We don't see him at all, he's hardly mentioned towards the end, whereas another character you see clips of, and he's just kind of mentioned throughout, but he plays such an integral part in the ending of the book that I kind of wish we'd seen more about him and his background and just that kind of thing. But yeah, I did enjoy reading this, and I'm really glad I picked this challenge to start off the year. So I'm quite looking forward to seeing what next month has to hold. And now onto the part I have been looking forward to since I basically finished the book. To find out my next challenges, just give the pot a shake to shuffle them up. It's not really a pot, it's a box, but I didn't have a pot available. What can you do? Shake, shake, shake. Okay. Exciting. I think I've got one. My next TBR Jar challenge is read a new to you author. This is basically to read an author that I had never read before. I tend to read quite a lot of the same authors, so beginning of January I went out and spent Waterstones vouchers that I got for Christmas on buying new books by different authors that I've not read before. So this is quite an exciting one. It means that I can just pick at random from my shelf, and I've pretty much got lots of options. So I'm quite excited, but you will have to wait until the next TBR Jar challenge video to find out what that is. Goodbye!